it's red. So today's video is going to be a little bit different. Now, just like about 95% of BookTube, I am an aspiring writer. I love to write. So I'm hoping, because I know there are so many other booktubers that love to write, that we should talk about it, because I love people who talk about writing in their videos. So I'm hoping that maybe you guys will enjoy it too, and maybe you'll find something helpful in the way that I do things for myself. The first thing I want to talk about, and you will see this in lots of writing books, authors will say this all the time: if you want to write, read a lot. And I know for me, reading a lot is extremely helpful. Not necessarily with story ideas and stuff, because I want those to be mine, but what I do learn from is reading how and noticing how authors seem to develop their story, how they pace things, how they develop their characters over the course of a book or a series. I learn from technique, and it's not like I'm studying the books like, oh, how did they do this? No, I am reading books that I love and that I'm enjoying, and while it's occurring, I can sort of think about what it is that makes me enjoy this book, what makes me feel like it is a well-crafted book. And these books that I find well-crafted, with well-crafted characters or well-crafted storylines, I learn from what exactly it seems like the author did to make it successful, and that I can apply to my own writing. The next thing I want to talk about are books on writing, and there are a lot of great books. There really are. My personal favorite, because this is the book that I found the most inspiring, is On Writing by Stephen King. And the first half is mostly a mini autobiography, kind of chronicling his life up to him becoming a successful writer. And I really enjoyed that, because I loved watching the process that brought him to where he is today. I absolutely loved that, because nobody's born a successful writer. You have to work at it. The second half is full of just great tips and advice, and basically I read this book so fast, and by the time I finished it, I felt like I could conquer the world. I felt that I could write and publish anything. I felt inspired. I felt a sense of security in the randomness of some of my processes, how not everything fits into a little box, and that you have to know your own creative process. And this book, I feel like, is supportive and encouraging, and it just, if this doesn't inspire you to write, I don't know what will. Journals. Journals are really, really important to my writing process. That is for sure, because I like to have journals on hand, because if I get an idea, I want to be able to write it down. If I have a dream that gives me an idea, I want to write that dream down. This keeps track of everything that I say I'm going to remember, but realistically I never will. I have the big habit of being, oh, I'll remember this idea, and then later when I want to use that idea, I'm like, oh, I had a really great idea, but I don't remember anything about it. Not good, guys. So unless you have a crazy good memory, unlike me, journals are really, really helpful. Plus, I tend to write a lot of character profiles. Sometimes they're not even characters I end up using, but I love developing the characters in my own mind. Just because I write out a character's eye color and something about the background doesn't mean these details will ever make it into the story. But I know them, because so mentally I can use that information to affect how I develop the character, even without having to say all those unnecessary details, because they're necessary for me to know. And I love, love, love writing down and creating character profiles, whether I use those characters or not, whether I consciously mention those details in my story, completely irrelevant. It's just, I think it's helpful and I enjoy doing it. Let's talk about inspiration. I get my inspiration from everything. One of the biggest sources of inspiration for me are my dreams. And I know that probably sounds ridiculous to some of you, but I will tell you right now that oftentimes my favorite stories that I've written were originally inspired from dreams. And of course, I had to weed out some of the randomness that always comes with dreams. I had to weed some of that out. But by the time I managed to fix it up and add on to it with other ideas, I've actually created something from a raw inspiration. Dreams are fantastic. I can't tell you how many times I wake up and I go, that would make an awesome story. For those of you who don't know, Stephenie Meyer actually based Twilight off of a dream that she had. She had a dream of the meadow scene, and she wrote a book on it. And whether or not you like Twilight is irrelevant, because she took an idea from a dream and turned it into a book, making her one of the most successful writers in the United States. I mean, there's something to be said in that. She took a dream and she ran with it. Sometimes I get really random thoughts that don't originally seem like they mean a whole lot, and eventually you can turn those random thoughts into something. For example, I had this random idea about how fun it would be to write a scene with 3 old women named Susan that I could call the 3 Susans. Not because I wanted to write an entire book about 3 women named Susan, because I don't, but I thought it'd be fun to write a scene. And because I had this random idea, I kept thinking, what kind of story could I fit a scene like this in? And that led to me developing a whole story that all around one little scene that's pretty much irrelevant compared to the rest of the book. It's pretty minuscule, but that one little scene is what grew the rest of the story. I also get a lot of inspiration from events and people that I meet in my daily life. I work in customer service, so I meet a lot of people and a lot of personalities, sometimes really great people, sometimes really awful people. But I can actually use them and sort of store their personalities, maybe their name, if I come across somebody with a cool name. But I'm able to sort of store that information about them and maybe use them in characters later on. Maybe it's somebody's particular brand of sarcasm. Maybe they were really, really mean, or they had some weird tick. I don't know. But I'm able to sometimes use that and piece together a character based on traits that I might not have previously thought of, except that I actually encountered them already. I do the same thing with events. Sometimes some event that occurs in my life, I find a way to include that in the story, and I build upon it, and I mold it, and I warp it, and it turns into something usually pretty different. But without that original source of inspiration and latching on to that original source of inspiration, the rest of it would have never existed. Now, outlining. When it comes to outlining, I don't do it very often. I'm not gonna lie, I really don't. But honestly, I've become very comfortable with that. I used to be very, very insecure over my lack of outlining and how I felt like outlining inhibited my writing. And I thought that made me somehow less of a writer because of it. But that's not the case. That's not the truth. Everybody has their own creative process. Some people, they outline to the every last detail before even touching the actual content of their story. And if that's what works for you, go for it. Outline to your heart's desire, because it's about what works for you. For me, outline like 90% of the time doesn't work. It actually inhibits my writing. And that's not great. But once in a while, if I get a lot of ideas, I will definitely outline the story. It doesn't happen very often, but once in a while. And it is okay to shift your process from one story to another, because every story is like its own little baby, it's its own little person. And it's okay to adjust your process accordingly. I know my favorite story that I've worked the hardest on is the one I've gotten the farthest with. That was not outlined at all. I will continue to not outline it, because outlining does not work for this particular story. But I have another story that's outlined to a T. The entire storyline is completely outlined. I have character profiles. And it just all depends. So the most important thing is learn what works for you, because everybody is different. And don't be worried about other people's processes. Don't be worried about that, because what works for you might not work for them. And what works for them might not work for you. And that's okay. There is no right or wrong way of going about it. Alright, let's move on to editing and drafting, the exciting part of the talk. But my thoughts on editing is do what works for you, because you're going to hear some people that say, oh, don't worry about editing, just write. You know, you can edit later, and that's extremely true. That's very true. And sometimes I do write like that. I just don't worry about how pretty it looks. I just get the words down, because sometimes I just want to get my ideas down on paper or my computer. But sometimes I get very bogged down by the way my story structure is currently. I know with one of my stories, I absolutely could not get past the block and continue, because I was so caught up in what I wanted to change. So I ended up redrafting and everything that I had. You know, I didn't change the events or anything, but I updated some of the writing, I updated some of the scenes, And honestly, I felt like it's like when you clean your room and you suddenly have a mental clarity. That's what I felt like. And that was what was able for me to, that's what I needed to do before continuing with my story. And that's okay too. And again, it varies from story to story. It varies from writing time to writing time. And you have to do what works for you. This is what works for me. And sometimes, again, it's a mixture of things. So I say the biggest thing is figure out what your creative process is. What works for you. Take ideas from other writers, successful writers, other amateur writers. It's okay to take ideas, but don't be worried about it if you don't do things exactly the same. Because you don't want your books to be exactly the same. You want them to be yours. So your creative process has to be yours as well. So I guess sort of the main point of this video, when it comes to your writing, know yourself. That's what I had to learn for me. I compared myself to other people's processes. I compared myself to other writers, and that wasn't healthy for me, and that wasn't good, and it was hurting my writing more than it was helping it. But now that I've sort of put things into perspective and realized that it's okay to do things a little bit differently and do things my way and to take inspiration from what other people do, it's okay. It's okay. Just get to know yourself as a writer and don't be worried about what other people are doing. I hope this video helped you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know it was just a lot of me talking to the camera, but maybe it'll help at least one of you guys out there. Alright, I will have more videos out soon and I'll talk to you guys later.